Welcome back to the OPEX Podcast, where fitness is explained. I am your host, Robbie Burke, and I'm joined on today's show once again by James Fitzgerald. On this episode, James and I discuss integrating strength speed work into your programming. This was a fantastic episode with James, guys. It is jam-packed full with information, as always. I know you're going to love it. Stay with us. All right, Fitzy, we're recording, sir.
Hey, buddy.
Strength, speed, and how to incorporate it into programs. You got an hour. Go.
Okay, only 2% of you should ever touch it. There we go. Close it down.
We're done. I love those controversial little what are they called? Sound bites. Like, what should people do for bodybuilding? And you just, or for I just gave away the answer. You were like, what should people do for CrossFit? And you just go bodybuilding, and then you just walk off.
Out. Yeah. I think it makes people think about it.
No, seriously, I'll give a little more of an intro. So, the topic for today is going to be how to integrate strength speed work into fitness program designs. I'm just letting you know I have my notes here. That's why I'm looking across here. Ebook came out recently, free ebook download, which will be in the show notes. As I've said to you just before we got online, I read through it, made my notes this morning, and very impressed with it. Just the way the information was delivered and the aesthetics of the ebook is amazing. Like, you'd pay for this little ebook, like it's immense.
Yeah, that's important, right? So that the communication can get across. You got to commend our team for that.
Definitely. Now, actually, before we get into the topic, just to be polite, what's new with you since we last spoke? What's been going on?
Not much, really. Nothing that's been really surprising or would be of relevance to being excitingly new. Just been continuing to teach the people that are currently going through OPEX CCP. As an example, last week I had a call for the cohort group that was just finishing up their CCP. And then another call for groups that were brand new to the cohort. And so Jim and I did that call for people starting. Also had a call with our a licensing group, a full team call. Had a full call on Monday on working with our licenses on discussing case studies and keeping them up to par. Had a really great case study analysis of an avatar of the 35 to 40-year-old. We called it the avatar was the lost female. And it was a fascinating avatar case study, which we became really specific with them, but it was great.
When was that? When did you do that?
That was 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Was Jim on that call?
No,
because we did a podcast lately, and he brought up the example of like the kind of, well, it wasn't quite 35, 40. Yeah, an avatar of a high-powered female who like was looking to get back some like empowerment in her life. And I was just like, where did he get that from?
Oh, no, he wasn't. But you never know. It could have been in the discussions for all of our groups. But it just seems that a number of those that avatar is pouring into our OPEX gyms. And I think it's important to wrap principles and framework around how to approach the design from a language, from a business language, so we can really understand where everyone's coming from. So we talked about their history and their generation and their social ramifications and what they grew up in and why they're presented where they are and how you wrap that into understanding their why in fitness. It was excellent, fascinating. So nothing big and new, but just keep rolling, still rolling.
Just before we hop in now to the strength speed topic, just for the audience, I think it's because there might be one or two out there who actually do want to know do you know how many affiliates, OPEX affiliate gyms you actually have right now?
60, and I think it's 55 to 60, something like that. And I'd say by the end of the year, we're looking at 80 something OPEX gyms. Yeah.
Yeah, 100 was the target, wasn't it? So
yeah, I think 85 or 88 is the number we're going to go after, and 100 was the target. So it's pretty good.
Sweet. And the majority of those in the US, I know Drew in Manchester.
Yes. We have one in Australia now, and we have numerous in Canada, and there's a number of them now in Europe, mainly in UK.
Sweet. Sweet. Yeah. So
But
I'm
one Swedish individual on board for the new upcoming one.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So, and again, for the audience, I'll have all that linked up if people want to contact OPEX about that.
Yeah.
So
lots of information on that one for everyone.
Yeah, definitely. So strength speed. I know you're a fan of Eric Cressy's strength speed continuum video, which I'll put in the show notes. But let's get into the topic, because I know it's a topic you get questioned with an awful lot of time. First of all, there is a lot of confusion, and even myself, with like the semantics of strength speed and speed strength, and then because some people say, oh, strength speed and speed strength, they're velocities on a velocity based system. They're actually not biomotor abilities. They'll say starting strength, explosive strength, they're the biomotor abilities, and strength speed and speed strength are just ways to measure them through velocity, and then it gets a bit confusing. But anyway, I think what would be good is defining strength speed just for this conversation anyway, even if it's not accepted universally, just so it gives a little more reference point for the audience.
Yeah, for sure. We want to put in some notes too for people to go back and look at those, the different languages, because I think what coaches and the public needs to recognize is that this language on the investigation of different forms of contraction have been around for a really long time. Mm-hmm. It's just that people use different terms, right? So SIF drew up numerous diagrams to allow people to understand what that looked like. That's Mel Siff and Super Training, Zatsiorsky. And I know that Kramer's book with Zatsiorsky has a really great representation of what that looks like. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Eric Cressy's YouTube video. Brian Mann, as you know, has a fantastic velocity-based version of what those contractions look like. So it's important before I embark on it to say, go out there and see how people just call it something different. Mm-hmm. But it's important then because you can see what the differences are from one end of the spectrum to the other. So the way that I describe it is, on one end of the spectrum, we're calling it absolute strength. That would be very high loads. The weight is not moved as fast, and the intensity is proposed to be the highest on that end of the spectrum. So in classification, you can think of a deadlift as being something that sits within absolute strength. Yeah. Now, in order to define what strength speed is, we have to know what's just to the right and further forward than strength speed, because you have to find an intricate in between. Because I think what science wants to do, especially strength coaches, is that we want to just attach percentages of load from that absolute strength to define what's inside of strength speed. And that's not necessarily correct. So in absolute strength, that I gave context, that would be a deadlift. Next is strength speed, but speed strength, which follows that, and then into absolute speed, the load per contraction starts to diminish. And if you're considering that load is based upon intensity, or intensity is dictated by load, then the intensity lowers the further you get away from that absolute strength portion of the continuum. So what is speed strength? That would be some of the moderate or lowest loads moved at a much faster rate. And then absolute speed is the highest speed, the lowest loads, and moved at the fastest rate. And so then where does strength speed find itself? It finds itself right in the middle of the highest load and moderate to lower loads moved very quickly. And so that's where strength speed categorizes snatch, clean, and jerk, and barbell movements, in which you're trying to do strength speed in most cases to develop not only the gross motor ability of moving load, but trying to move that load quickly. Now, in order to move a load quickly, you have to have two things in place. You have to have an intent, which, of course, as you know, is a deep rabbit hole on activation, but there has to be an intent. But you also have to have an intent with a certain speed that goes with that movement and that contraction. Therefore, just to make sense of it, you can deadlift 500 pounds, but it's going to be fairly hard for you to create the highest amount of intensity with 310 pounds on that same deadlift. But if you try to move the 310 really quickly and the barbell speed increases, then now it's getting into classifications of strength speed. So that's why we classify things in strength speed with the classic lifts of snatch and clean and jerk, or all their derivatives. There's actually some other ones that fall in there just due to fitness, and the modalities used in fitness, like a kettlebell swing with a specific load can be put into strength speed. A thruster can be placed in there. Quasi touch and go efforts or barbell cycling activities can sometimes be placed in there depending upon the load. And so, yeah, I'll stop there.
Just out of interest, so, and just again for the audience, all that information that James spoke about is actually in the book in terms of outlaying that absolute absolute strength to speed continuum. The force velocity curve is an interesting concept because a lot of people look at it and think the further we go to the right hand side, like force goes lower and velocity goes up, and for the most part that concept is correct. But actually, if you look at things like top end sprinting, force actually doesn't go down; it goes up. Now load goes down. So if you called it the load velocity curve, it would be correct. And then another thing I just want to get your thoughts on too is, what about eccentric contractions then? Because we know that actually velocity and force actually go up. Again, load could be down, but what sort of consideration should we take into that in terms of programming if there is a large eccentric component to it?
Yeah, can we come back to the first point you made there and then make sure you reiterate the second question? But my mind couldn't get past the first point. I think what the clarification is, because it's not just semantics. You raise a good point, but I think let's say whoever decides upon that continuum and what it looks like, what they're talking about is the amount of force per contraction. And so if you have, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it's like running with the heaviest load on your back and then running with less loads over time. And that's where I think, your point does make sense, that force doesn't always, correlate with changes in velocity as people start to sprint. But I think, that's where sprinting as an absolute speed piece sometimes creates some, problems with semantics on it.
Yeah.
But I would agree that load, as I said, load always can allow people to classify where things sit in there.
Yeah.
Now recap your second question.
The second one, so no, you're perfect. It's fine. And the second question was, so again, with sort of the force velocity curve, concentrically we know that force, or if you like, load goes down as velocity goes up. But eccentrically, that isn't the case. Actually, velocity and force go up eccentrically. So just in terms of program design and programming dose responses, depending on the client, like how much of a consideration should that be? Again, it's going to be obviously very dependent on the modality you're prescribing. But you're the guy who thinks deep about this. So I imagine that's come into your concepts. You're thinking at some stages.
Yeah. Well, I'm still not sure how that comes to be, because in my mind, velocity doesn't increase with eccentric activity inside of a context of load, because under higher loads, the eccentric mechanism and the survival mechanism of the motor unit is actually slowed. So if load diminishes and load goes down, then you can have higher speed in an eccentric area.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense? So I didn't understand when you said in eccentric work you can also have high velocity. Does that make sense? If load is high, then your velocity is low in an eccentric endeavor.
So I wouldn't be talking about like going down slow eccentrically in an exercise. I'm talking about, like, so if you land from a depth jump.
Yeah, that's reactive. Reactive ability.
If you're jumping down like eccentric, so you actually have high force and velocity with that. Or if I just do a normal counter movement jump, like I go down fast enough.
Yeah.
You're storing then obviously the kinetic energy, like.
Yeah, so I'm calling that reactive strength, and you may have to come back to ask your question again, but I'm calling that reactive strength. And in that case, there actually isn't. But to your point, in that area in reactive strength, arguably, I mean, this, it's hard to study it, but there's not a lot of eccentrics that go on. There's an isometric survival component, and then a release of that stored energy to go in the opposite direction. So what you're calling in reactive strength, if it looks like there's an eccentric activity, it really is a survival mechanism of a massive isometric, trying as hard as possible to hold on, and then a release, which, reverses the action to go in the opposite direction. And so to your point, yeah, in reactive ability, or I would call that, especially if it's repetitive action, I put those into classifications of speed strength activities, because in speed strength activities, you have a coupling and multiple repetitions of a coupling, where yes, what looks like an eccentric activity being higher, still is higher, but the load is very low, right? So yeah. I think we're saying the same thing. We're just trying to create language on what it is, right?
But and the reason why I think this is a prudent conversation is, again, and you'll appreciate this. I was actually when I was on my walk this morning, and I was thinking like about some of these questions and then semantics and how to formulate the questions. I was like, you wouldn't have this problem in engineering or medicine for the most part, because our language is the same. Like, whereas this is another kind of like, excuse my French, but this is another kind of fuck up of our profession. Is like no big agrees on exercises. And I remember Mike Boyle was like, how are we supposed to get respect when we're calling things like like these weird, like, well, dead bug isn't a bad name, but he was giving like, funny names for exercise. And he's like, medical people looking at that and say, why would you, like, that's a ridiculous name. Like, how do we get any respect for that? And we can't even agree on semantics. But the reason I was going to bring that up too is in the ebook, it actually says that strength speed is made up of 3 distinctive qualities, and it was starting strength, explosive, and reactive ability. So then when I read that, I was like, reactive ability in strength speed. So that's why, and then you said you'd classify that more as speed strength. Now I know you co-wrote this book with a few guys, so maybe there's some different thought process.
Yeah, no, I did not. I can look over the principles inside of it, but I didn't write it, and I'm not going to pull myself out of it for that point. But I want to argue that point just to make sure that we're clear. I think that the variables that make up the ability to express strength speed the most effectively is motor control with more tension over time, and then moving motor control with tension to a maximal contraction in a high load, low speed, low force development position. That's the prerequisites to express strength speed the most effectively, not just the most effectively for one time, but the most effectively such that it can be expressed for a really long period of time and you can recover from it.
Yeah.
And it leads to an increase in strength speed ability over time. So I would disagree with the fact that, I'm not sure what the wording was, but that reactive or explosive strength is a prerequisite for that. I think it's secondary to the expression of it once absolute strength is built to its maximum.
Sorry, that's if I said that, that's not what the book said. Sorry,
okay.
It said that strength speed has 3 distinct components to it as a quality, not as a prerequisite. So it said
as
that
a quality of it.
Yeah, so it's saying that strength speed is made up of starting strength ability, explosive strength ability, and reactive ability. Like it says that those 3 things make up strength speed. And I was thinking that reactability to me now wouldn't be in that component. I would have had more towards speed strength.
Yeah, I would agree too. In the purest definition of strength speed, it's rate of force development, the cycling ability, motor unit cycling ability, or rate coding, I guess you could say, for the kind of load that's imposed upon it. So I would put classifications of reactive strength in a speed strength classification.
Yeah. I know in super training, like the graph that Verkhoshansky has, he talks about rate of force development, and he has it down as starting strength, accelerating strength, and then explosive strength as the recruitment goes on over the curve. But sorry. So that if I said that was a prerequisite, that's not what I meant at all.
Okay.
So in the book, it says that strength speed is made up of 3 distinct components, and those were starting strength, explosive strength, reactability. And then as I read that, reactability to me stood out because I wouldn't have had that as a.
In naming, that should be placed into the lower load speed strength classification.
That's what I was Yeah. Yeah, we kind of went that. So my next question was who should do strength speed activities?
Great question.
And then the prerequisites, you touched on that. So the prerequisites, you want to make sure you can actually express some sort of force, as you say, go down the well of the nervous system. So go ahead with that. So prerequisites, and even maybe touch on the deadlift and squat numbers you'd like to see as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think if we're going to classify strength speed, we want to create the tone that it all has to be under good movement and good technique. And secondary, we want to say to ourselves, what's the purpose of it for function? And so I would make the argument that humans, in the intelligent designed humans that are around us today on this planet, I would say there's probably a decimal of percentage point of people that should ever participate in true classification of strength speed activity. The reason being is that it's so far away from function in our definition of function for most humans. It's so far away from function. Arguably, let's just say it's lined up like this. Someone needs motor control, then muscle endurance, and then maximal contractions before they even move into expression of strength speed. Most people need to spend like 40 years in motor control, okay, before they even get to higher tension or maximal contractions. No, I'm talking in terms of function. Like, what do you need to function today, right? And not everyone's a carpenter, not everyone is a wakeboarder. Not everyone is like, jumping, buildings on a single bound. Like, there's a very small percentage of people, including those in sport, that have to do that. So I want to prerequisite that with great technique, no matter if you do it or not. And number two, please ask the function. Like, what's the purpose of it? My commentary is always, just because it exists doesn't mean you get to touch it, right? So sprinting exists. Usain Bolt sprints. Should everyone sprint? No. Just because it exists doesn't mean you should be able to touch it. Does that mean that no human's ever going to have to run 100 meters very quickly? No, possibly. But you still have to create the context around what do they need in order for best preparation for function in order to do that. So people need to have a robust amount of experience in absolute strength. Now, I generally say robust amount, and there's no actual booklet that says, oh, good for you, February 1st you can start strength speed because you signed off on what James wrote down and said that was capable of doing it. But so there has to be some, someone has to propose some ideas of, well, what really do you feel is necessary for people to move into that class, into that area? And I generally use a deadlift and a back squat around someone's body weight. You can do it for a few repetitions, the same thing for a strict dip and a strict pull-up, and that would allow you to move into trying to express strength speed as much as possible. Because in most cases, if people can move a load against their own body weight in a hinging or a squat pattern and relative strength in the upper body, a lot of times that creates enough entry, albeit still with perfect technique, to allow them to try to do some strength speed activity. And then for those individuals that, are trying to do strength speed activity for sport, or they're trying to do it for coding, or they're trying to do it for force development, or they're trying to do it for, to stay away from absolute strength activity, which sounds kind of crazy, but that's essentially what higher trained individuals do over time, is they stop doing as much absolute strength and they start working on intent and velocity based stuff because the intensity is lower, which we'll get to that. So there's, you have to be able to, and this is the thing. So if you're like, well, I just heard him say, I've got to squat and deadlift my body weight a couple of times, and I got to do 3 pull-ups and 3 dips. There's going to be people on two ends of the spectrum. Those are complaining because they'll feel they'll never get strong enough in order to do that. Well, give it time. And until you get that strong enough, then you should be able to do it. And then others that'll be like, well, okay, I'm there. So that means that I can just fully express it as much as possible. You still have to remember that now that you're probably a decimal of 1% of the people that need to do it, now secondarily, you have to say, can I express it effectively? Can I recover from it? And does it lead to my maximum potential, whether it's for life or for a sport? And so even though you're allowed now to express strength speed, you still have to be able to do it under correct pretense to make sure that you're expressing it effectively. And I think we get lost. I think it's a very valuable, kind of contraction where the percentages are, lower than a maximum, let's say, for a maximum 1 repetition. And I just think that it needs to be treated with care because of coordination and balance and accuracy and all these things that are allowed to be placed inside of the contraction due to the percentage being lowered under the 1RM. Yeah. People just think that it looks more dynamic and athletic. And it's just been a big narrative push on strength speed activities from high intensity fitness model over the past 20 years. That's why we're even asking this question, right? 20 years ago, we wouldn't have even asked this question, right? Or you know, if you were alive, Robbie, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have asked me that question.
As an 11-year-old, excuse me.
What do you think about strength speed?
Who is this very chubby 11-year-old? My God, he's pale. Just to let you know, in the ebook there is the order of strength development before anyone should go near strength speed, and it does say motor control, muscle endurance, strength endurance, and then maximum strength. So that is cleared up in the book. The wording here was strength speed is characterized by 3 distinct components: starting strength, explosive strength, and reactive strength, which we've spoken our thoughts on that. Just a digression. Like, I want to remember this question because it's not completely off topic, but you often speak about, like, what is the person's goals and their functions. So for instance, you're sitting at a desk all day, like, you don't need to be doing Olympic lifts and all that because it's not doing anything to enhance your ability to sit at a desk all day. But just one question I have on that, like, with the elderly and rates of falls, like, would rate of force development and, like, if you like low level of reactive ability type training, would that filter into your training for that population?
No, because absolute strength and motor control activity will take care of proprioceptive issues as well as increase immune system strength and tendon, all the shit that's happening around the tendons and the joints and head to toe, that can be taken care of through absolute strength and motor control activities.
Okay. Because I do, like, I know there's coaches that still do some form alongside strength. They still develop strength. They'll still do some power development.
Yeah, and my argument on that, I've worked with an elderly population in Calgary at the YMCA. I was very lucky to be able to do that. Actually, I have some funny stories around it, but I don't think we'll ever find some research that would show, like, a true long-term definition of a difference. So if you did, let's say, 3 years of reactive ability activities or reactive strength activities, and then you did 3 years over here with how hard that's going to be to create a study to do that.
I know.
So I always err on the side of, what makes sense for multiple things. So I don't look at, like, what the issue is, for example, you would understand this, that a lot of strength coaches, I think, incorrectly look at the main injuries in a sport to dictate what training should be. Yet they're not even higher order in their thought process to say maybe the injuries in the sport are occurring because of lack of preparation, not because of, you know what I'm saying? Like, maybe the injuries are occurring in the sport because a shit ton of your athletes are out of shape, or maybe the injuries are occurring in the sport because no one's prepared enough to actually participate in the sport. So now you've wrapped your entire year around a prehab model to stay away from ACL injuries, yet you forgot that really they're not even prepared to play the sport. So you see how circumventing that, this is the same thing for the older population, that I would think the safest, the most effective, the one that's going to get the biggest bang for the buck. So immune system function, chances of trying to increase lean mass, tendon strength improvements, the ability of self-responsibility in training. This is another thing people forget about, right? They need to become self-responsible. I think that entire group that did 3 years of pure slow, let me say it, bodybuilding would be far more appropriate for reactive ability and strength improvements as opposed to reactive, actual specific reactive ability. Secondary to that, the central nervous system ability and its coding, the function of it, I think that can be done through just any kind of tension. And I don't know if it has to be specific to the kind of coding that's necessary in order to prepare them for that fall, if that makes sense.
Well,
but we'll never know.
Well, rate of force development can be developed through isometric intent. Like, I mean, that's how they tested it. Pulling on the mid-thigh pull.
Tensiometer.
Yeah. So, like, I mean, that's a nice station traction. But no, good point. And, like, so the one thing, and this would be a great podcast itself, elderly population, probably something on some stage. It's funny because you're just like, nearly every topic you was like, this is a great passion of yours, James. It's like, this is also a great passion of yours, James. Like, we're talking about you population, so we're talking about elderly population.
Yeah. Well, the medium is just the, getting the dose response of what happens to humans in fitness correct. And that's what I love discussing. So,
listen, I could go down the elderly rabbit hole, but we'll stay on topic here. So, back to strength speed. So we've covered up the prerequisites. Kind of maybe just a little bit like, who is it really for? So like, let's say, like, if you did, like, okay, if you're in the sport of fitness, it's your sport. So it's going to have to be in there, and it's also going to have to be trained through particular modalities and exercises, mainly the Olympic lifts. But if you did have somebody, general population person, and they have hit all those requirements, which is unlikely, but just say they're in that little short percentage, are you happy to prescribe it to them if they've met all those prerequisites?
Yeah, I might prescribe some things that are not challenging coordination and balance. Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned, like a push press, maybe a thruster with dumbbells, a kettlebell swing.
Yeah.
And I can sound like an old man saying that, but I am an old man saying it. So listen up. I've done it for 20 years to make the mistakes mm-hmm. of thinking that I'd be looked at as a better coach because I'm taking 6 months to teach a general population person how to snatch, and in the end it's like, why? What is this actually carrying over to? Like all the bullshit in your head, right? All the bullshit in your head. It's going to help, improve their absolute strength because we're moving weight quicker. Yeah, but actually what you have on the bar is 67%, but in their brain, it's 99%.
Yeah.
Do you see? So now you've created this compensatory model of their brain perceives this to be so challenging and some would say, well, that means they're working at a higher percentage. And I'm saying, no, they're developing compensatory patterns of force development to try to make it work to impress the coach. So if you did simple mechanical movements that expressed it in those things, I think there is a spot to play for those individuals. Now, the interesting thing, Robbie, is that in general population, it can be used in two different methods positively under great technique. It can be used to move people into a metabolic endeavor if they wish to do so, because you can imagine how those three things I talked about could possibly be moved into some more, fun, enjoyable metabolic endeavors. And then secondly, it takes this person away from absolute strength training for the presumed higher increase in the central nervous system activation now. Mm-hmm. So as people get older, like you don't lift more intensely and maximal strength more often.
Nope.
You do it less often. So what's going to fill the gap? It's going to be lower loads under higher speeds. But you can't have high loads and high speed, which is strength speed for the more advanced person, even if they're general population. So I think that back to your point of question on it, if you're going to compete in weightlifting as a sport, then you have to do it. And I'll go really black and white here. And until you're 25 years of age and you have expressed absolute strength to its maximum, you're going to have a super hard time explaining to me until I'm blue in the face why anyone else needs to do strength speed activity, even to carry over to sport development. So if your argument is, well, we got 19-year-old soccer players and, we saw this research of rate of force development and increase in speed. And I will argue, side note with you for hours as to how only absolute strength training and the sport itself could help take care of decreased injuries, proprioceptive activity. You know where I'm going. And at 25 years of age, when they have maximally, and the reason why I say 25 is because everyone thinks, somewhere around 16, a human is like fully developed. No. Now it's like humans are not even developed till like 30s, right? With neuroplasticity increases that we're finding out. So prefrontal cortex and central nervous system, I'm using as like, when are those maximized? And it's well known, it's between 18 to 25 years of age. So I'm going on the far end of the continuum. So until you're 25, unless I said you were going to be competing worldwide in snatch and clean and jerk, I see no business for it, right? Now, there's a lot of arguments to that, and I used to be in multiple different areas, a lot of arguments to it. A lot of people would say, the weightlifters would especially say, the strength coaches that are huge on weightlifting would say, well, it's just because you don't know how to teach the snatch and clean and jerk. And so they hold this like tool in their pocket as if they're like magicians on what the snatch and clean and jerk is given.
And then it doesn't just lifting, and it's fucking brutal anyway.
Oh yeah, that's a secondary point. But you see, my point is that there's multiple ways with a deadlift, for example, or a trap bar to change load and intent and still get force development, right? So, but what complicates things is when people think that snatch and clean and jerk needs to be implemented because of all the white paper evidence and all the brutish testosterone bravado-based, shaming on coaches that they need to do it. Yet people are doing it with shit form and ironically not getting any force development. So all the coaches that are actually making success, you know what they're doing? Trap bar deadlift, bench press, and some great not parallel squatting, right? And then they're making sure it's safe and they're not causing any problems. And guess what? Athletes are not getting injured. They're able to develop force, et cetera, et cetera. And those that are pushing way over into the strength speed continuum are causing some problems. So it has to be under the context of great form. It has to be for function. So if you're not a weightlifter, I'd say 25 years of age up higher, it's okay. An area that's squeaking in there now would be a fitness athlete, because if you want to compete at 17 at the highest level in the sport, you need to be good at weightlifting. So we're classifying weightlifting and all the various derivatives of snatch and clean and jerk inside of that sport as well, which is probably another call, because that's a sad state of affairs that we're in, where we have underdeveloped humans trying to express things that they should not be trying to express. And it's done for commercial interest. And just like the NCAA, your kid is going to be a champion, same kind of pressures that they're placing within parents inside of facilities now in micro gyms to make that happen. So it's community soccer all over again inside of functional fitness gyms.
Oh, Lord. Just to clarify for the audience, are you saying that no one should practice Olympic lifting before 25?
No one should try to express it at its highest level.
No, just so you know, I understand what you're saying. I'm trying to like...
but I'd rather go black and white.
Yeah.
Because then people get graded like, well, I think he said you could do it. It's like, just don't touch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't even touch it. Oh, can I practice it? Why? So that's the only reason for today is I'm going black and white with it. Okay. Have I done a lot of it with people before 25? You bet your bottom dollar. But I would just, try to make people think really hard. And if the reason why you're doing it is because it exists, that's a bullshit answer. If the reason why you're doing it because you want people to learn skills, that's a bullshit answer and a lack of alignment in what they're doing in fitness. If the reason why you're doing is you don't have enough tools in your trunk, get more experienced. Watch YouTube. Like there's lots of options out there for exercise selection where people can be safe and still get contractions that are effective, because we're talking about gen population here, right? And even for sport, like try to give me an example. Some coach in Canada is gonna be like, well, my hockey players are doing hang power cleans. I'm like, that's great, dude. If it's great technique and it's all good, I'm happy for you. But I would say that the safer, most effective method to be able to get good force development within a context of not allowing this discrepancy of compensation to happen is to stay in the absolute strength realm. Don't even touch snatch and clean jerk stuff. It's useless.
I love when Fitzy gets riled up. It's great. But just a few little continuations of that, just going off your point there about the hypothetical coach with his hockey players. Like people say, like, oh, well, my guys Olympic lift and we're explosive. It's like, yes, but they also lift. They do plyos, they do med balls, they do hypertrophy work.
Which makes the continuum perfect, right?
But you know what I mean? You can't, like, you got so many other variables going on. You can't say, well, it's just
I know. So what helps it?
No. But another question then to you is, okay, let's remove strength speed and replace it with speed, because again, biologically, we're not like going to get to maximum physical potential till we're like mid-20s, maybe even later 20s. But obviously, sprinting, nearly every single sport is sprinting ... like being your sports skill. So
field sports.
Field sports.
Yeah, field sports.
So what would your thought process be on that? Because obviously the younger people are going to be exposed. Is that a case of like, is that the equivalent of, well, if you're going to be competing in Olympic weightlifting, well, then that breaks that rule, do you know what I mean, of 425. So if you have someone who's playing field sports and they have to sprint, yet they obviously won't be able to maximally express it, they still are going to have to train it to some degree.
I would disagree. The reason why I would disagree is that we're assuming then that someone at 26 years of age is all of a sudden next week starting a field sport. But that's not the case. The kid has been doing sprinting since he's been 9.
Yeah. So is it okay for the kid to sprint since he's 9, is what I'm trying to say? Yeah.
He has been, because he's been in his sport since he's been 9.
But would you sprint someone then if they weren't?
No.
Yeah.
If they're not doing a sport, then why am I sprinting them?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering.
Yeah.
I was just wondering. It'd be the same.
You said field sport, so I'm assuming you're talking about training for a field sport.
Yeah.
They should not sprint. Why? Because they're sprinting inside their sport. The sport itself and the sport practice, since they've been 9, they've developed that entire end of the continuum all by itself to almost probably its maximum. Now, the only way that continuum is going to continue to improve is not by training absolute speed. It's by training the opposite end of the continuum.
Oh yeah, we're going,
which is absolute strength.
Yeah, no, we're right. Like we just got usually in our conversations things get confused there. No, so
it's the distance. There's a whole bunch of water between us.
Damn you, world. But no, so like, sorry, what I mean there is like, so like if I'm a young kid, like if I'm a young Olympic weightlifter, like let's say that's going to be my sport, I'm obviously going to train the Olympics from a young age.
Yeah.
True. So, but if I play a sport where sprinting is like a field-based sport, like I play hurling since I was there, I'm going to have to sprint. So what I'm saying is like, you would train sprinting with that individual because it's part of their sport, even though like they still can't, like a 9-year-old.
When they start the sport, possibly. When you try to figure out, again, another topic, another time, their basic motor skills, where they sit in physiological development, et cetera, but that dictates if you're going to give them sprinting or not.
Yeah.
But I think where you're not being clear is you said a young athlete. Like, what do we mean? An 8-year-old or a 21-year-old? Because the 21-year-old, if they've been playing the sport since they've been 10, they don't need to do sprinting. Again, it's just as an uncomfortable as conversation as strength speed. Just because it exists doesn't mean you need to express it, especially if you're doing it all the time. If anything, what they need to be doing is the other end of the continuum, motor control and great muscle endurance into maximal contractions, to allow them to do that sprint repeatability, not at a higher level, but to recover faster between each sprinting effort.
Yeah, you see this.
So sprinting won't make them better at that.
So should be clarified there on biological age versus training age is really what we should have clarified on there.
Yes.
But yeah, no, you can see that with basketball players who have fantastic reactive ability, but they don't have the absolute strength to support it.
Yeah.
And they get injured.
So what they should be, and you know, and we joke, right? Or well, we joke, but people are, especially the young coach, because I remember being in that seat. You'd see like what a professional athlete is doing in the off season, and as a young strength coach, you're like, that's tiddlywinks, like that's bullshit. Like he should be doing CrossFit, and like power snatches, and box jump rebounds. And, cause all you're thinking is like, what's in the sport and what do they need to do? But do you know why they're doing bands and lying on the ground and doing floor work and dancing and capoeira and Ido Portal stuff? Is because it's all tendon work, motor control, muscle activation, and what's considered still absolute strength activity. Right, which allows them to express what they do on the court most effectively. So I find it ironic that people hate on that, yet really, why should they be doing what the sport looks like? And besides the fact, like anyone who's really interested in basketball, it's not like they take an off season. I mean, these guys are playing ball a couple of hours a day, every day.
Yeah, the one thing
shooting, drills, whatever,
The one thing I will say on the sprinting thing though is just like technically, like most field-based athletes have horrendous running technique. So from a motor control or technical aspect, it's still very important to train that end of it, because you can still improve technically, mechanically.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, world-class athletes.
I think I don't have. I mean, I've worked with field sport athletes, but I'm not going to say that like I'm on that job all the time. But I'll just offer maybe a new insight into it, that I think a lot of non-contact injuries occur because incorrect lifestyle, improper conditioning protocols in the training, and the incorrect management of the strength training.
Yeah.
I don't think it's due to specificity of reaction and speed, agility, quickness, and sprint activities.
But I don't think the body's ready for that stuff.
What stuff?
Like the speed and the agility. I don't think it's robust enough to handle that.
But that's what you just said is, you said that you think it's appropriate for training for that specific population. And I would argue that you could pull that specific training out, technical abilities of it. And I think the technique would improve if you have better proprioception, which comes from a better base of the CNS and freshness.
That's if that's a limiting factor, because if you were looking at sprinting, so like the sort of the way that, well, the way I know that, like, say, I know Stu would talk about it, Stu McMillan-Altus, and then also Nick Winkelman, if they were looking at like just say pure linear speed, we'll just say, just for this example, and something just wasn't right, they would break it down into, Nick uses the words, is it position, pattern, or power, which basically means position is it a mobility or stability issue, or what Stu says, is it mechanical? Like, is there an actual mechanical like deficiency that they can't get into the angles or positions that I want? So like, is it an ankle issue or hip issue or T-spine? They actually can't hit that angle of propulsion that I want to. If they do have that, if they have cleared that out, you do know that they have those requisite joint motions and all that. Is it a technical issue then? Like, do they not just understand what like the angles to hit? And also, if they can't get into those, so if it isn't mechanical and it isn't technical, then is it just purely down they don't have the physical capacities, which is, you know, kind of to your point, in that like if they just got stronger, more powerful, then they could express a better technical model. So that's the way they would look at it. Through those three windows.
Yeah, for sure. But I think that, you know, you don't fix both of those by sprinting. This is our point. Like, if it's technical or mechanical, that's not fixed in a sprint setting. He doesn't, you know, I'm just to make humorous of it. Well, you don't make them run up and down the field all the time, go thoracic extension, extension. You know what I mean? Like, it's fixed in a absolute strength or probably a proprioceptive environment.
But if it isn't mechanical and it isn't a strength or a physical capacity issue, well, then it is technical. Then it is actually technique you need to work on. But but it's technique in a non-sprint setting. No.
Does that make sense?
I don't think I would agree with that.
Okay, well, give me the example you had said of thoracic extension or ankle positioning.
But like, if you have the mobility and stability, if it isn't mechanical, so like just your body can actually get into the position that we're asking it to get into, and you do have the motor control and absolute strength capabilities, because we know that from your weight room numbers or from your general strength numbers.
Yep.
Then it's a technical issue. Like you're not technically executing your skill correctly. But if you don't have those
an elite sprinter, yep.
If you don't have the prerequisites of, if it is a mechanical issue, well, then we're putting a cart before the horse. And then if you don't have the capacities to support a technical model, you're also putting a cart before the horse. Yep. It's like telling a 10-year-old to get into a 45-degree lean and accelerate. It's like, he's 10, he doesn't have the strength to do that. So he's not going to hit a 45-degree lean and acceleration. So you'd be banging your head against what? Whereas, so that's going to your point. If you just like, well, natural biology would just even, he'll sprint better when he's 12 and 14 and 15 because he's getting stronger as he goes along. But that's because he just doesn't have the strength to get into those angles and express it.
Yeah. There's a lot. So another time, because there's a lot to dig up there. I got a lot more questions for you based upon that I think, we just haven't unfolded. But I got a lot of questions. Maybe I need to get inside of those models and see what's being taught in it, because in my head, unless you're taught, in my head, it looks just like ironically, the conversation on strength speed is that, why are you working on those motor abilities if, number one, they can't express it, and number two, it's not even necessary? So if we're talking about an elite sprinter that's in Diamond League and needs contracts, yeah, I guess that makes sense, i.e. like our conversation on snatch and clean and jerk for strength speed activity. But if we're talking about field sports, and we know these people need to understand how to move in a chaotic environment and be the most resilient as possible, I'm still going to come back to the argument on why sprint technique is important, when I believe, capacity, better lifestyle, better styles of training, and the correct kind of environment in the sport that allows them to express that is probably the healthiest, not a sprint training program. So I would think you have to do it concurrently. It's a skill, so I don't see how like you need to practice the skill though. Yeah, and that's going to happen in the sport.
Yeah, but people, field-based athletes sprint terribly. They sprint all wrong because they're not taught how to sprint.
Maybe they don't sprint wrong.
There is research from I know you're, what's his second name?
Do you know why I'm asking that question though?
Ken Clark.
Or are we making that point?
Or JB Marin. Like they've compared the technical models of an elite sprinter to a field-based sprinter, and they're saying the difference is the mechanisms of why field-based sprinters get a lot of injuries that they do in terms of hamstrings and ACLs. So like a field-based sprinter has a lot more heel delay, mid-thigh deflection, strikes out from the center of mass more. There's actually James Wild, who's done a lot of research on acceleration between field-based athletes.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to negate the fact that that's probably the case, but that's a poor argument to say that's the reason why they need to have sprinting. Think about that. You're saying that because it was seen that these things occur in the difference in a baseball player and an elite sprinter, that the baseball player needs to do the elite sprinter activity. That's like saying a CrossFitter is getting more injured because they don't look like a national weightlifting champion. So we need to do the program of the national weightlifting champion on top of the CrossFitter. That doesn't make any sense.
No, yeah, I think you're stretching with your argument there a little bit.
No, I'm not. I'm using the baseball player, field sport.
Yeah.
Right? Baseball player, and I'm using Andre DeGrasse.
Yeah.
Okay. So an elite sprinter, technical ability, let's call it the 100%. So he gets the 100% score, although he doesn't. But let's say he gets the 100% score in technical ability, right?
I gotta agree. I know what you're going.
So the argument is saying that because this is what it looks like over here, ground contact time, angles, etc., in a lab and all the biomechanics, that means the baseball player, when they get injured, is because they don't look like Andre DeGrasse. Is that the argument?
No.
Okay, well then.
The argument is that, so the argument or the point is that the field-based player's technical model could be better. It could be more like the grass. It's not saying it should be like the grass. There is a technical model to work towards, but the field-based player is still going to have his own individual bandwidth of movement.
But your comment was that the research showed that the argument was because they don't look like Andre DeGrasse, that's why they're getting injured.
As in the technical model. So the technical model of a field.
Well, then why even have it if it's not the answer to what causes the injury? Otherwise, you should throw in lack of water.
Yeah, to me, if sprinting is part of your sport, you have to practice it.
And I'm saying that it depends upon the biological age. If you're a 9-year-old, you're practicing it, yes, maybe right from the get-go because it's a biomotor skill. When you're 25, I don't think you need to because it's being expressed in the sport. And by training it, even under its technical pretense, it can be done within the sport and not as a specific skill, where absolute strength training by itself would help you express that most effectively and recover faster than if you actually did sprint training with that person whose scores 85% on a technical ability. And I think that injuries are a really poor way to dictate what people should be doing for that sport in training, because as you know, 90% of most athletes have shit lifestyles and don't eat correctly and don't have a good training program.
But one thing I will say about the 9-year-old is that even if you sprinted from 9-year-old to 25 and you've never been taught, your technical model is not going to be good if you're a field-based player.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay, you can disagree. So, but Olympic weightlifters, they're taught to Olympic lift correctly from a young age. That's why they have nice technical models. But field-based players are not. There's no one in field-based sport that teaches people how to run right.
And that's a bad argument because weightlifting, there's load and coordination. So as the load goes up, the more technically you're off, it has to get fixed, and it gets fixed at a lower age because you will not progress naturally. So you'll just stagnate. In field sport sprinting, it's an open chain environment, open environment. That means that you need to respond to chaos, right? So as you get older, load doesn't increase, right? That's the difference in weightlifting and improving it up and being technically inefficient for 8 years. It never happens. It never happens. It happens with the kid who's following some YouTube champ for 8 years online, but it never happens in weightlifting because as load goes up, a 1/4 inch means the barbell falls on your head. So you quickly learn, right? So you have to create changes in positions in order to make you really good at it. Otherwise, you'll just stagnate, never past 100 pounds once you're 14 years of age. But in most cases, it doesn't occur, which is another conversation, though, too, because I see a shitload of coaches promoting a 14-year-old who just started to increase their body weight, and now they're like 14-year-old champion in weightlifting, but it's under the tents, under poor technique. And anyways, it's a whole other conversation.
I know. It's interesting. So interesting. I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know how much time you have left. We're on the hour. We'll
Whatever.
We'll wrap up on this here.
I got all the time in the world for this.
Going back to the strength speed here, just wanted to touch in here. It has different ways to incorporate it then. So if we're saying that this is an individual who is in the sport of fitness, the different categories here is technique work with pulls. Then it works into technique with moderate and intense complexes. Submaximal volume building, battery test work. I'll re-mention these as we go along. Touch and go barbell cycling, and finally then integrated barbell work with aerobic mix work where it gets into MAP 7 work and stuff like that and the integration of it. So if you want to maybe touch on each one of those. So the first one was it's kind of about technique work and pull variations. And again, now we're at a position in our conversation of this is a person that deserves to be here, or it's part of their sport and they also deserve to be there as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that would presume in that first stage that they have the absolute strength requirements, they have great technique, and there's a reason why they're doing this. And in that case, you're starting to move them up in percentages towards their maximum of, we'll just call it 2 lifts, a snatch and a full clean and jerk. And then now you're trying to figure out, as you get closer to maximums, where they sit amongst their technique when you move from the different stages of 65, 70, 75, 80, 85, 90% towards their single. And then playing in there, which is very robust and intense for the coach's brain. You got to try to figure out where their limitations are imposed as you're learning that skill.
Yeah.
So the second one was what?
The second one then is sorry, I hit the wrong note there. We're back. Second one is technique then with moderate or intense complexes. So it seems to be like
that's the
progression.
I just moved it up. So the technique thing, you're just making sure people can. The technique thing in strength speed is a weird area too, because you actually can't figure out technique unless there's the right kind of load relative to the 1RM. Now, the weird thing is you may not even know a 1RM. Just take the context that no one has ever done a snatch or clean and jerk, but they have the ability to be able to do it. And I know that's hard to think about, but so they have the ability to be able to do it and express it, but they've never done it, right? But you have to have some kind of an idea as to what their maximum is. But then that new maximum, if it's not 100% technical efficiency, it's not a true maximum, right? Because it's a compensated maximum. So in order for you to practice complexes or skill, you actually have to have some form of a load in order for you to figure out what are the limitations in that skill, right? You can't work at 30% with a snatch and clean and jerk and figure out what percentages are going to cause a problem when you're 90. You know what I'm saying? And because as you know, different loads change up different motor recruitment shit, and different loads change up different positions and different loads change up compensations, et cetera, et cetera. So this is another reason why Gen Pop shouldn't be doing it. It's too complicated for the coordination of all those things. So I think that when you start doing that technical work, in argument's sake, if people are going to do it for the sport, keep the percentages high because it's going to tell you a whole lot about what are the limitations imposed in that movement.
And then starting to build volume then into it. So in the book here, it talks about every minute on a minute format is a nice way to start building some volume, introducing maybe some fatigue then to the skill acquisition of the lifts. So and I think is it in this one? Yeah, it's saying that in mixed mold based sports, you're seeing upwards of 40 to 60 plus reps, usually within some sort of work pieces. So maybe we're just going to touch on some maximum volume and
because I think once you go beyond technical work and you're doing percentages, and let's just say it's complex work now, you are starting to move now towards speed strength activity, because I place barbell cycling in the context of it being used in the sport of fitness as speed strength activity. I don't qualify it as strength speed. So, and then if you're in grid, because people just think, I heard you say that sprinting is absolute speed. Well, in fitness, speed under the context of absolute speed is when you're moving a barbell as fast as possible. Do you see that? It's not context of load. So for example, at the regional, there was a snatch and burpee workout, right? Which people remember who did it was horrible, but it was a really fast paced, I think it was 175 male, 125 female snatch, and then burpee over barbell. And you had to do more and more and more over time. That's absolute speed for our sport. You see that? Because it has to be done as fast as possible. So then the practice of barbell cycling is speed strength. A triple or a complex in weightlifting is strength speed, and a sumo deadlift under high effort is absolute strength. So do you see how it's in a different sport the strength continuum changes? So I think where it's a little wrong there is to say that barbell cycling and capacity work is strength speed activity. It's not, because it's really a barbell moved for different reasons the further you go to that right. So especially when we talk about putting it into an aerobic setting, it's actually not called anything under the strength continuum anymore. It's now called just aerobic contractions. So we can't even classify it as strength speed. You can call it a hang power snatch times 10 in 6 rounds, but it's actually not a snatch.
Yeah.
Right? It's move a barbell from your hips to your shoulders multiple times and keep it sustainable. That's what it should be called.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Writing that on a pro. What the?
Yeah, I mean, we can come up with whatever you want, but we should come up with barbell names, from a hang to an overhead position when it's in an aerobic environment, because then the public would get more recognition of it not being called the snatch.
Yeah, it's so funny. If a physicist was watching this, he'd be just like, "It's just work over distance. It's just you're doing, it's a form of
with
doing,
load, right? Yeah, he'd be
like,
well, it's load and distance and repetitions, man.
Yeah, it's just work. It's just a form of doing work.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a mathematician as well, and he would say the same thing. It's like, man, you guys are so far behind in that.
Yeah, exactly.
Just add the numbers up.
First principles, people.
He's the guy I do all the arguments with when there's someone who wins an event. And we say the same thing, right? We're like, oh, he didn't win it based on his body weight and the total amount of work done. This guy was really impressive, right? He came 7th place, but he did all this work,
That's so funny because I did a lot of biomechanics this year between my masters and then
great,
going through the Altus Foundation course, and like the first module Dan has you do is biomechanics. And like when you start reading, about like, particularly when it comes like to torque and like moment arm and lever arms, you're just like a longer moment arm and you're doing more work, and it's just like makes you think about taller people, skinnier people. And it's just like,
oh my gosh,
then
in fitness, it'll blow your mind.
Oh, and then you're like thinking the actual internal force is like, that guy's actually doing more work. So it is funny. All right. I found this one interesting. The battery based work in the fitness program design for strength speed. So this is where basically it was saying that the sets of reps or a rep with a lack of full recovery, and you'd say in the progression model it could be building from 75 up to 85% of the client's one repetition maximum. So this is obviously when people are getting fairly advanced and they have good sound technical models and absolute strength capabilities. Yeah,
that's built on the premise that they have a good amount of volume. I didn't say aerobic capacity or aerobic built, right? They have a good amount of volume built, and they have expressed under great technical prowess all of the movements, and they have had great technical ability of all the movements in multiple percentages. Then now what you do, we call it battery. And the reason why we call it that is that it really comes from the context that you would know in your physiology around phosphate recovery.
Yep.
And the ability for, so I call it just a charge of a battery. So if your charge goes back up a lot faster than another person, why does that go back up faster than another person? It's largely due to your genetic predisposition, the intent of the activity, your mitochondrial ability, and your what we call aerobic potential, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the aerobic potential has to be great before you want to practice this battery style, which is basically, in essence, for different strength coaches listening, it's density work. It's like saying, do a double at this percentage, rest as much as necessary to come back and do that double that looks really good. And then over time, I'm just going to shorten the rest period between those doubles. That's battery work.
Yeah.
And what we've seen, ironically, and the reason why we need to train it in fitness, for those who are not in the sport of fitness who would find this fairly interesting, is that if you were to take anyone within a weightlifting setting and say, do a single power snatch at 88%, then the atypical coach with a higher training age of this athlete would go, oh, they would need around 3 to 5 minutes to recover from that. And the interesting thing is that within our sport, even with people who've been training for 10 years and are at their highest maximal potential, they can recover within seconds of 88% to do that exact same technical lift effectively over and over and over and over again. So this is the interesting difference between a fitness athlete and someone who's doing weightlifting for force production. The fitness athlete can do it under the same technical prowess, but recover faster between repetitions at really high percentages. And that's not just gender-based. So that's what we call lower neuromuscular efficiency, is presented as being a very positive thing within fitness, where within weightlifting, you possibly want someone who's really high efficiency because they could possibly exhibit higher activation of the motor unit pool that requires 7 minutes rest after a single, if that makes sense. So that's why we do battery work, because it's very specific to the sport. In case people are wondering, like, why would you want to decrease rest? It's like, well, you have to practice that specific skill, which is called battery. Battery is a skill.
how to integrate barbell work then into mixed aerobic work. So it's just saying here, each of these sessions, 10-minute design pieces of work, also known as MAP 7, which is covered in depthly in the CCP course. So yeah, and again, this again is kind of along the progression. It's getting into more sort of higher order training. So these are very qualified people to be able to do this.
Yeah, it should not be called, it should be out of a different conversation now, Robbie. It should now be called how to do mixed modal aerobic work. Because we're not even calling it a strength speed activity anymore.
Yeah,
it's a barbell that's moving through space over a period of time.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
I was just about to say this isn't strength speed now anymore.
No, it's not.
Yeah, but you still need to have that prerequisite in place of absolute strength speed before you start touching on this cyclic barbell work mixed in with aerobic.
I don't think so if it's repeatable and sustainable, because remember, we're not calling it, this is where language screws it up. Like, what's the difference? What's the difference in moving a 25-pound barbell for 20 times per round for 15 minutes? Are we going to call it a snatch because it's not even a barbell? So all of a sudden we use a kettlebell or use a goat bag and people are like, oh, that's not, he's not doing snatches anymore. It's like, well, what do you want to call it? You know what I'm saying? So if it's repeatable and sustainable, they can do whatever they want. That's always my context, is that people can do snatches in Metcons, no problem. But if you keep it repeatable and sustainable, it's not called snatches anymore, right? It's just called moving a barbell through space in an aerobic atmosphere. You see that? So sure, go ahead and do it if your technique is great. But like I posted on Facebook the other day, just because you do each of those snatches effectively doesn't mean that when you start dropping power, it's called snatches anymore, right? It's not a good movement anymore. Even though they look good, you're now in an unsustainable atmosphere. I.e., 4 rounds for time, hang power snatch, right? It's a Metcon. 4 rounds for time, hang power snatch times 20, burpee times 10, run 200 meters, okay? And then every round, they come back to the second round, and now they can't even do like 4 in a row of the hang snatch. So per round, their power ability is dropping tremendously for the overall amount of work, right? So now what they're teaching is that snatch, whatever we're calling it, in an unsustainable environment, which is going to result, ironically, in worse force development, worse technique, right? Just because, and people are like, but no, all the reps were good, James. You mean looking good? Yeah, they were all good, but they were all in an unsustainable environment. So now they've time-stamped fatigue and lactate training on top of that snatch, which is not the way that it's supposed to be improving force development, if that makes sense.
It's meant to be sustained. And actually the wording of it was really good. It was sustained aerobic power, and I was like,
oh, nice.
Yeah,
great wording.
That's how it was worded in the ebook. So again, that ebook will be in the show notes. And as you can see, me and James have lots of topics for our future episodes.
Yeah, I hope you took those down.
Older generation.
Those are some great. Yeah. The sprint training one specifically. The kids weightlifting. I hope you took the notes.
I've got more to ask you, sir.
Okay, good.
Reading materials. What are you reading at the moment?
Nothing. I just had a great Atlantic episode show up, so I get it online, and I just I read everything, right? Every side of the political spectrum, everyone's views. I love reading it, and ironically, this one in the Atlantic I've been waiting for because it's a fantastic article on. The heading is, it's a little strong, but the heading is your daughter is 13. She wants hormone replacement therapy. She says she's trans. And what do you do? And that's a very, it seems like just a current political topic today, but that's a massive, for someone who's interested in me, like I'm interested in evolutionary biology and biology itself, and, kids, I've got 2 young girls. It's just a fascinating topic to me as to how to narrate and navigate amongst those things that are happening today, right, without judgment of any position.
So I know, anyway.
And I heard of Ireland's new. I've read up on Ireland's new abortion laws and all the stuff that's coming down the pipeline over there, based upon some of the moves you guys are making.
The vote came in there at the end of May. Yeah, the referendum.
Funny one. Not to take your steam on it, but Sharon Preet recommended that one to me a couple of years ago, And then one of my coaches was like, James, I'm going down south. Oh, it was Matt Connolly. He's like, I'm going down to Spain or something for 3 or 4 days getaway. Like, throw me a book. And I read that one. I gave him that one to read, and he was like, you almost made me stay down there when I was away.
Yeah.
It was so powerful for him when he was on. He expected just something he could just fly through, but it could be very depressive depending upon your perspective of where you sit right now. So heads up.
Yeah. Matthew Walker's book, finished that as well.
Awesome.
You'd really like that one, so you would. So he did that 2-hour, brilliant 2-hour episode with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, I was so fascinated with people's surprise by his information. I was more surprised by people being like, "Oh my God, you hear this guy? He's like, So TJ Wiley did a great lights out, sleep sugar survival.
Yes, Wiley.
I mean that's the kicker. And Sapolsky's one.
She wrote that in 2000, and everything she predicted has like come true. In terms of it, so she wrote about like how
she was vilified.
Oh yeah.
Oh, she was persecuted because of that.
But she wrote in that book how circadian mismatches are massive. She was arguing that they were the causes where people were like, this is can't coming out with that. She was saying that they're massive driving factors in cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, and obesity, and like all of it's been proven right. Just off evolutionary biology, you'll love these two. I got these from the library, so I'm reading this at the moment. Life's Greatest Secret. So the race to crack the genetic code. It's actually quite interesting.
I like the title of that.
This one's even better though. This was one of Jack Ruse's recommendations. Nick Lane, The Vital Question: why is life the way it is? So he goes through like he's all like we know like how that a lot of how, but we don't know why. Why is it that way? Like we make good predictions of how life came to be. We have no idea why it is that way. So it's super interesting, right?
So it's probably like Sapiens. Because he's had a good, I guess, an overarching idea of why things came to be.
Yeah, but he's digging more. Nick Lane's gone like more down to like the actual like molecular biology of
Okay.
Yeah, like he's talking about like bacteria and archaea and how they came together, like how the mitochondria came into a cell and eukaryotic cells and all that type of stuff. So
okay,
yeah, it's interesting.
Awesome.
All right, so just for the audience, there's my reading material, there's James's reading material. So if you do have a daughter who's 13 and she's trans, James is the man to talk to at the moment.
No, right now I haven't read it yet.
Oh,
but her review is going to be an interesting one for sure. I've heard it's well written.
So from myself, Robbie Burke, and from James Fitzgerald, and the topic of strength speed, and we'll have lots more topics coming in the future as well on many other areas. That's it from me. James, anything to say to the listeners?
No, thanks. Thanks, Robbie, for your questions. It was great.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. All right, guys. See you later. Peace.